April 8th, 2023. Well, we get back away from the domestic situation and the out of control DAs to the situation in the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of things have happened while we've been away from that topic here. It looks like that, first of all, the Wagner group of Russian mercenaries has taken advantage of a snowstorm that occurred several days ago and launched a fairly major offensive, perhaps being reinforced by regular Russian troops, and are actually making some progress of taking several sectors of Bakhmut, and they've pretty much taken most of the central section now. They finally took that sports stadium that was a big strong point and several other things, and they're also encroaching around the flanks as well. So that basically it'll be the western Ukraine is still pretty much under, excuse me, western Bakhmut, excuse me, is under Ukrainian control, and of course there's going to be pockets of resistance. Ukrainians have been fighting pretty ferociously to hold every inch there, and it's quite a situation. The other development, which we'll get into a little bit further on here in the video, is that there's been a release of some U.S. classified documents that have showed up on, I guess there's an article about them in, well, it showed up on Telegram and I think on Twitter. I know the Grayzone at least has several, like 5 pages of it, which I was able to look at today. It took a while to find it, and I'll put a link to that in the description below, so you can look at it too if you want. There's also an article there in the Grayzone that kind of summarizes it, and so that's another major development. But in Bakhmut, it looks like that's the main area of contest. Otherwise, along the whole line of contact, you just have a series of kind of Russia attacks here and Ukraine attacks there. A little bit land changes here and a little bit of land changes there, but there's not a whole lot of progress or regress, how you want to look at it. So anyway, by the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, you can send links to any friends that might be interested. And by the way, thanks to the new subscriber, whoever you are. Thumbs up there, appreciate it. So yeah, this is so that's kind of the situation. But the big topic that's kind of brewing is the potential upcoming Ukraine offensive, or will there be a Russian offensive? We're not sure yet. That's one of the enigmas. There was a lot of consideration that the Russians were going to launch some kind of offensive in the winter, but it turns out they didn't. And as I said before, largely I think because the weather conditions weren't good and maybe the troops weren't quite ready either. In some of my earlier videos, maybe 2 or 3 back on the subject, I had addressed the issue of when you bring in 300,000 individual reservists, and mobilize them, you could flesh out existing units that have been depleted by casualties, but to create whole new combat units out of them is a somewhat tricky proposition. It takes some training. Where's the equipment coming from? What kind of condition is the equipment in? How long does it take equipment and storage to be refurbished and got up to operational condition? So that's a big issue. And it looks to be like that they were probably ready to launch any major offensive during that period anyhow, or maybe the weather just stopped them. At the present time, therefore, the other thing to consider is perhaps the optimum situation from either side, and for that matter, be waiting for the other side to make their move. Because whoever makes their move may be forced to come out of their trenches, out of their holes in the ground, and you ought to see some of those things that they built. They're kind of like a beaver's nest or something. Sort of like a foxhole covered with sticks and brush with a hole in it where they can shoot from. They're interesting camouflage and cover they use. And anyhow, but when they do that, of course, they'll be subjected to detection by drones and artillery fire, etc., and so the casualties go up. But Ukraine apparently has been promising an offensive, and this document I mentioned details the status of 9 brigades that are being prepared for this offensive and where their equipment is at the moment, what they have, what they're waiting to get, and when it will be there, training statuses. Very interesting stuff. And so, that's in the mix there. Now, one thing I mentioned is you go to that military history and all. I would look at two examples. The Allies in World War II, had after D-Day had broke out and overran the Germans, had really wiped out a lot of them, and moved up toward the German border, the Siegfried Line, etc., that kind of thing. And by that time, the Germans had mobilized a bunch more troops and were waging a fairly successful defensive situation, partly because of logistical issues that the Allies had at that point, being that far forward, and partly because they were encountering pretty effective resistance, I think. So then the Germans launched a major offensive with their most elite units that were left, and but had inadequate fuel supplies, and basically ran out of gas behind U.S. Lines, and had to abandon their tanks. And those that weren't captured or killed walked back into Germany, and the offensive potential of the German military was reduced. And from that point on, we launched our offensive on to victory in May of 45. So what I'm getting at is another example would be in the Yom Kippur War. The Israelis, after were in a situation about a week into it or thereabouts, where they were on the defensive, and it was only when the Egyptians launched their second offensive and lost that Israel was able to counterattack and really make some major headway, crossing the Suez and encircling the so-called Third Army of the Egyptians. So what I'm getting at is here, the Russians particularly might want to wait for this Ukrainian offensive now that they are where they are, which presumably will come when the ground gets hard and the troops are ready. Probably, I'm thinking May, probably. They're talking April, maybe, but right now it's still pretty muddy. And so in May, they attack at that point, and if they don't succeed in really doing a devastating blow, that could be the situation where the Russians would then counterattack and really move them back some. So that's kind of it's up in the air, kind of who goes first and what happens. But getting to this document, there's been a big discussion about is this real or not. I've seen 5 pages, and looking at what I'm looking at, to me, my guess is it's authentic. It has what looks to me to be, as much as I know, obviously this is a security breach that has appropriate markings as far as I can tell, at least the ones I recognize. And I would say that it looks like a very professional military intelligence document prepared by people that know what they're doing. And it also it's sort of, the pages are kind of folded and look like they've been taken with maybe a cell phone camera, perhaps, and then maybe emailed to somebody, their contact or whatever. So my guess is that Ukraine has a spy in their organization working for the Russians, and the Russians have released this because it's a month old. So it's a little out of date, but it probably is also to create a little concern on the part of the Ukrainians on the U.S. side that they've been penetrated, but now it's old enough that they've already had a chance to react to whatever the data is in there, and so I think that's probably what I think about it. Some people are thinking it's Russian disinformation. I doubt it. I really do. And I don't think it's something we would put out as disinformation, because it really undermines our propaganda line. In fact, what it really does, it undermines everybody's propaganda line. I've been saying all along how much I don't believe what either side is saying. Well, it says if this is sensitive internal opinion, expert opinion, it suggests that the casualty numbers have been thrown around are completely off to some degree. At least, particularly the Russian ones they are estimating 16 to 17,500 killed in action. And that the Ukrainians is somewhere around 71,000 killed in action. And of course, since this is a U.S. Ukraine allied type document, I presume produced by the U.S., but they probably have feeds in from the Ukrainian contacts and the advisors that are working with Ukrainian units and headquarters. And besides that, let's face it, we're picking up all kind of intel out of the area with our sophisticated electronic eavesdropping capabilities. My guess is that that's probably pretty accurate about the Ukrainians and probably not that wrong for the Russians. So what that indicates is the kill ratio really isn't some outstanding 10-to-1 numbers like you keep hearing. It's 4-to-1. Of course, that includes various phases of combat. The recent years may well be more higher in favor of the Russians because, let's face it, in the early part of the war, it was probably more favorable to the Ukrainians because the Russians were pretty much driving into ambushes as they moved toward Kiev, as we recall, going down a tree-lined road and getting ambushed all over the place with both artillery, drones, and javelins and NLAWs from whatever bush they were hiding in. So the more recent environment might be more favorable to the Russians a little bit, but still overall the war, it looks like it's been about 4-to-1 in favor of the Russians because of their artillery dominance primarily. And the fact that unlike all the discussion about poorly trained, actually, relatively speaking, they're probably better trained. Especially after the Ukrainians took heavy losses and had to bring up large numbers of reserve and territorial units, recent conscripts, and so forth. Like there's a group that's being trained with the British I saw on and recently, I think it was on video, was it TV? It's hard to keep all the sources mixed up. At any rate, there was British, NCOs training these Ukrainian troops, and they were going to get 35 days of training before they were going to be sent into combat. And one of the concerns they had is training them good enough so they didn't accidentally shoot each other, which is a real issue in a combat situation, particularly when people are under high stress, fearing imminent death or in the war, and all of a sudden, think people can make mistakes and with these rifles. Anyway, you got the point. What I'm saying is that we, for instance, the United States and the Vietnam era, I think it's about that still, is about 17 for infantry, about 17 weeks from induction in the Army till basically being able to be deployed to a infantry unit. About 8 of basic, I think, and 9 of advanced individual. I think it's still right, but that's what I remember. That's what we were doing in Vietnam anyhow, that period. And I think it's still about the same. And so the point I'm getting at is, anybody that knows can correct in the comments. But the point is, that's 5 weeks versus 17 weeks, big difference. So at any rate, that gives you an idea what's going on here. And so, anyway, that's kind of about what I have on that. And of course, the wounded are probably about 3 times that. So for total casualties, so about 4 times for total casualties if you add the killed to the wounded. And of the wounded, of course, a certain number are going to be permanently put out of the war by serious injuries. Others, will the lightest wounds maybe heal up in a hospital for a while and then may come back into combat or do rear echelon work. So that's some pretty substantial damage, though. But it also shows that both countries can continue this for quite a while. Neither one of them are quite to the end of their manpower pools, let's put it that way. So, and the equipment losses, of course, that I've been looking at some videos on that too. It looks like Russians are refurbishing older equipment and bringing it into new tanks and vehicles. So, refurbished, somewhat older models, but they've been upgraded. So, and on the other hand, we are going to have some new equipment coming in. That's the main thing that's in these charts I'm talking about. They do have a list of 9 brigades and their status in terms of what equipment, tanks, and armored vehicles they have in artillery at the present time, and then what's expected to come and what the training status is. So it's something that's coming that way sometime, probably, they say April. I tend to think it's still going to be May, but they're going to have to wait till the ground is good and hard. The troops have fully integrated this equipment and are ready to go. And then they have to pick a direction, which way they want to go. Right now, there's a lot of fear on the Russian side. I think they're going to move into Bakhmut and try to run them back out again. So, and the Russians have to be careful of their flanks there too. So, because that could be what happens. They're going to be meeting some Leopard 2s and some Challenger 2 tanks, and that'll be kind of a new experience for them too. On the other hand, these will be tanks the Ukrainians have not really been that used to using in combat either. So they have a lot of other things. They have Bradleys we provided, and there's a German armored infantry fighting vehicle. So there'll probably be a clash in May, and we'll get an idea how the war is going after that, I think. On the diplomatic front, the French president, Macron, and the head of the EU are in Beijing meeting with President Xi, trying to negotiate something from their point of view. There's a little bit of talk about peace negotiations too now. Now, whether that really happens or not, I don't know. But that would always be an optimistic thing, I think, to kind of bring this to a close and come up with some kind of a reasonable solution. At any rate, so I'll be, as always, posting this on Rumble as well as here, YouTube here, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. Also put a link to that article I'm discussed, and if you really want to look at those charts, I would suggest you download them to your computer and then bring them up, magnify them up as much as you can, because they're kind of hard to read. Maybe a magnifying glass would help. But it basically goes into a lot of details and interesting information. Shouldn't be out there, obviously. It's probably due to a Russian spy that's inside the Ukrainian military, I'm assuming. But, so anyhow, I'll be wrapping this up for now.